What would you like to do if money were no object?
Wealth is a product of the mind. No amount of money you ever achieve will make you wealthy.
Now is the time to take risk.
Winners don't make excuses when the other side plays the game.
The only thing we have to fear is
failure is just there to point you in a different direction.
You're listening to the Inlight Podcast with your host, Max Starr.
Welcome to the Inlight Podcast. My name is Max. Joining me today is John and Colin from the Inlight Team. Before we get started here, I just wanted to let you all know as we get into uploading regular podcasts that if you have not joined already, join our mailing list where we will send the podcast every single week straight to your inbox. Just go to learn.inlighttrading.com/list. All right, now let's hop into the conversation.
Gentlemen.
Okay, so the conversation today is on a blog post we will be posting at the same time as this podcast about John's expeditions in Mongolia. John, if you want to kick us off and tell us a little bit about it. I know Colin's not too familiar with the story, so hopefully we can get some good reactions out of him. But yeah, please enlighten us.
Yeah, sure. So 2013, I was working in Singapore, and at the time, looking at distressed debt, and the world was starved for good ideas. So one of them that came up was Mongolian mining. So this is a Mongolian mining business, hence Monmin, hence Mongolian mining, focused on met coal. So met coal is the coal that you use for steel making. And Mongolia is like this crazy resource-rich country. It's like northern Minnesota. There's a lot of iron resources. It's just rich in all these resources. But so Monmin had issued this I think it was $500 million USD high yield bond, and all the underwriters and advisors had gotten like deal of the year awards for underwriting this bond. So clearly this was interesting, right? So this, the end markets were China, right? So at the time, China was growing, demand for steel growing, demand for met coal growing. So I wanted to go check this thing out for myself. So it could go either way, right? So this thing was kind of on the precipice. If you look at the underwriting documents, the plan that they had was very aggressive, a lot of growth, volumes, customers, and it hadn't played out yet. So I decided to join this trip to Mongolia, 𝗬𝗓𝗃, specifically the capital city, to go meet with the management team. Kind of on a whim, but I thought, look, if I went up and figured this thing out, like I'd be a hero, right? I could short this thing, I could go long this bond, and I'd have stories forever. And I do have the stories forever, but the story of being a hero is one for later on. So fast forward, I remember turning to my assistant, like, hey, I need a ticket to 𝗬𝗓𝗃. And she's like, where the hell is that? I'm like, well, it's the capital of Mongolia. And there's like one airline that flies in there. It's the national airline, which tangential, it was just sort of an amusing story getting on their DC-9. And then there's like pictures of like the German chancellor everywhere. And there's this relationship between Mongolia and Germany where they had set this trade deal. And they flew at that time to like Hong Kong, Beijing, and then I think Munich, just because of this relationship with Germany. So we're airborne, checking out the map. It's always funny, like, wow, I wonder why that is. So land at 𝗬𝗓𝗃𝗯𝗲 Airport, like truly 𝗬𝗓𝗃𝗯𝗃 Airport. And it's what you'd imagine. It's this like 70s style Soviet with like all the sweet lighting and architecture, like very brutalist. Get on the minibus and we're traveling through, and like the development is wild. It's sort of like a 2-lane highway that's going to like 6 lanes. And the construction season is like 4 months. So I guess I didn't really put together, like it's freezing cold most of the time. So these guys are jamming. So we're driving into 𝗬𝗓𝗃. I did a little bit of research in the front end. So UB, as they call it, it's a city that was designed for like 400,000 people. And when we rolled in, there were at least 1.2 million, if not more. So you had a city proper that was built. Mongolia is trading hands between China and Russia over time, and now it's fiercely independent. But so you got like elements of architecture from both these times, and then Western architecture that had popped up in the last like 5 years of the time when this commodity boom had taken place. But in the foothills, you could see like the yurts and like the nomadic farmers. So like the juxt was amazing, right? It's like this steel and blue glass, and then like 3-4 clicks away, people were out migrant farming. So we roll in, and there were a bunch of meetings that were set up before this one. So the first ones we had were with local banks. And about a year prior, a pretty big investment bank came to town and bought a minority stake in one of these banks, thinking it was this growth market, clearly commodity play. So everyone else is trying to catch up. So we're having meetings with these banks. They were very awesome meetings. just like some of the stuff was wild. So it's like 30% loan growth year over year, which if you're in finance, that's unheard of, like for a stretch in time. Usually you can't do loan growth like that and maintain quality, but somehow they had, right? So a little bit like, so questioning about what are these loans going towards? Mining equipment, okay, infrastructure development, totally get it. There were some hospitality pieces to it. And then the one that like surprises me the most, they were making loans to the nomadic farmers, and they'd go collect them based on landmarks. So unlike a loan where your mortgage comes with like a payment slip or you have a corporate address, they would go out to a coordinate, like literally like I'm making this up, like the oak tree 20 paces past the rock or whatever, and they meet the borrower there like every month, and the borrower would pay them physically, and they'd make loans based on that, right? And the collateral would be the herd. So the guys are telling us about that, and you're trying not to have reactions like, what? Like, okay, like how do you, the questions like, how do you, anyway, and you don't ask the questions, but no. So the first bank meeting we had ended, I wish I had a photo of this, I couldn't find it, but we're in a yurt that they'd constructed on top of this like 6-story office building. And it's fantastic. Like it's just for show, but like this yurt like overlooking. So a couple bank meetings, and then we met with the telecom company, the local telecom company. I don't know what my cell bill was there, by the way. Like I'm sure it was like the roaming was insane, but they just rolled out 3G, and they were just like super proud of 3G, which I get it. It's not like this is like the cusp of new tech, but like these bankers were just railing like, when's your 4G rollout? Like, when are you going to be acquired by blah, 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 blah. And they're just like, we're not, it's just like these weird bankers like trying to push their deal because they wanted to bring in, or 𝗕𝗏𝗃 Telekom or Singtel or whoever. Like clearly they're going to want to buy this true growth story. And when that growth story wasn't there, you could tell they were a little disturbed. But from there, we went on a dinner, which was just fine. I'm not laughing about it, but just, I think in Asia, I had more food with heads on it than I've ever had anywhere else. Like, I don't mean like whole fish. I mean like other animals with heads. So this was, I don't know what comes to mind when someone's like, hey, Mongolian dinner, boom. Like what comes to mind? Like, I know when someone tells me like, hey, think of like an English meal in the 80s, right? It was like meat and potatoes, which this was. This was heavily meat and then like fried starch. But the meat was yak, goat, including a fried whole goat head, like with the eyeballs, like the whole thing. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen, is James Bond, is it 𝗬𝗏cie the one with the circus? And I think that they eat a goat head in that.
I think so. Yeah.
So we had the goat head and then like gallons of like super cheap, Russian vodka with names like, Gold Standard, like just the stuff that you'd imagine, which, didn't set up really well. But, and then our sponsor, a local gentleman, was like, we're going to go out to my club. And everyone's a little happy at that point. We've had a little bit of vodka and whatever. I'm like, great, let's do it. So we go back to the hotel. I'm like, for some reason, I'm like, I got to like hit record. Like, how are we getting there? Like think of time and like think of landmarks. Cause like, dude, there's like a decent chance that these guys are going to be like out all night and you're going to want to go home. It's like, that's my MO. So we get on the school bus and we're driving through like the streets of 𝗬𝗏𝗃 at like, I don't know, it was like 10 or 11 at that point. And it's like windy. And so it's like kind of that dust, like the tumbleweeds, but like dust and things moving down the street. And I'm like, all right, what are we, 2 clicks east? Okay. And then like we start turning and I'm like, I think I can get back to that main street. And I don't know what the names of the streets are. They're unreadable. But we get to the club and after like a 20-minute discussion, we end up paying $10 cover charge. And we're like the only ones in there. But it's like this multiplex, which is sponsored by Johnny Walker.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. So like there's all these like Johnny Walker posters everywhere. And like we're getting a bottle of Johnny Walker. And then the band comes on. And the band is this is all true story. The band is a Filipino cover band that had been flown in from Manila to 𝗬𝗏𝗃 to play at this club. And not that Filipino doesn't matter, but just like how in the world did that, like why? And they start off with No Doubt, like I think it was Underneath It All or something. They start covering the song and I just can't hold it together anymore. Like I just kind of lose it. And I'm like texting people and there's like this light show behind them. It's like this laser, like this 80s laser Top Gun, like there's like F-14s flying and like laser shot and the club starts getting full, like more people. There's a bunch of different like business groups gathering. So at the end of the song, she stops and she points to me. She's like name a song or something. And I couldn't, like, I just like fucking lost it. So she like moves on to the next person. Sorry for my language. But that, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. So like another hour goes by, we get in the bus, and thankfully did not need to walk home. Like that was good.
Mm-hmm.
But I did have to get up at 4 a.m. for my fantasy football draft. So all these people in Minneapolis and New York, whatever, like, hey, and they're late. And I'm like, come on guys, like we gotta go.
They're late.
Like, are you? Like, I'm in Mongolia. I'm like, oh. So I send photos out of the hotel room. Which of course, yeah. So we get to the meeting, right? So we get to the meeting with the mining group, and it all goes well. So one of the issues, and this is just stuff you don't even think about, but one of the issues they were having was logistics. So a lot of these mining businesses, sometimes it's easy to get the coal out or get whatever out, but like, do you ship it by train? Do you put it on a boat? Is it trucks? Whatever. So early on in their life, getting enough of these like big cat trucks was hard. You can imagine that, and you're way landlocked. Mm-hmm. So you got to ship them, and then you got to drive them. But so they had a really interesting issue. So they were transporting the coal by rail. So they're taking it to the border with China, and then for some reason, which will be apparent in a moment, they were switching it to another train and then taking it into wherever. And like, raise your hand, like, why don't you just do one train? Hey, look at that, supply chain master, one train. The guy's like, that would be wonderful, except when the rail system was built in Mongolia, it was built by the Soviets, who used a different gauge rail than the Chinese rail. So they built the rail system to the border with just a little bit different rail, because they were afraid that they were going to be invaded by rail. Think about that from that. They thought that
naturally that's the way you would take.
North, I guess west.
How orderly of them.
Yeah, right. Just
yeah.
But a little blue engine that could, I think I can. So they built this system that like just totally inhibited it. So their solution is they were going to build this rail spur that was going to, use the right gauge rail for China, and that was all going to. So that was the information that was good to get. Other pieces I didn't put in the blog that I thought were hysterical, just because I didn't want to get long in the tooth. So I'm like a bald, Germanic white male. So I'm walking through the city, and I didn't really know how to dress. Candidly, it was like kind of an expedition. So I'm wearing like a cargo coat, jeans, and boots. And people would just like grab my shoulder and just start speaking Russian at me, like blah 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, not for something like an Eastern German language. I'm like, no, thank you, sorry. So that happened a bunch. I skipped the Ministry of Finance meeting. So one of the other meeting we had that they wanted us to meet was, if you go on these tours, a lot of it's like you'll meet, especially if you're doing developing markets, they'll have you meet, depending who's got the pull, like the central bank authorities or something like that. They just want to tell you what their policy is as far as budget and blah, blah, blah. So we went to the Ministry of Finance, and it's in this like crumbling, very Soviet brutalist building. Like the floors were veneered over something, but they were giving, and like they put these like bump ups over things, like you're tripping every 6 meters or something. It was very strange. But so we go into the boardroom. We're just kind of waiting, and then all of a sudden, like this entourage rolls in, and like shaking hands and like taking photos, like the slow, and then like the camera, and then like the slow. I'm like, what the, so, and then the speaker begins, and the Minister of Finance, and through his translator, saying, we're really, really thankful for all these Western banks to be here and investors who are supporting the economy. And like, okay, like I like completely surprised. Like we were just expecting nice to meet you. Here's what we do here. Who are you? Whatever, a coffee or something. But this was like hey, everyone, they're going to invest in this, like very propaganda-ish. So we were joking on the way out, like 100% chance, like there's like a photo in the newspaper the next day of like, one of us Westerners in the Ministry of Finance, like, hey, economic development, blah, blah, blah. So we had the meeting with Mom, and I mentioned. So on the way out, the guy that led the trip is like, you need to get some souvenirs for your family. And this is only fun. I think it's fun. I'm like, all right, great. So one of the products they have they export besides natural resources is wool. So they've got like these amazing cashmere factories, which I'm not sure if you can find it anywhere else. But so we went to the cashmere store, and like everything is on sale because like the currency had gone bonkers. I remember having a receipt that was like 1.4 million something, and it translated to like $700 or something. Like I remember saving it. I was like, look at this, like it's just crazy. Like a bag of cashmere. Get on the plane, get back. Like so I ended up like trading that bond a couple of times, which is great. But ended up that they didn't get to where they needed. It looked like things were going well, and then their prospects fell off. In Mongolia, we went through some problems. I think the IMF had to come back in and bail them out or do something because the currency got a little wonky. Which goes to show what can happen when your economy is all resource-based and you don't have a reserve currency. But I traded it a couple times. I remember end of the year party. It's just like the head of the office would tell stories like, here's the weirdest thing that happened this year, whatever. And he's like, John, why did you go to Mongolia? I'm like, shit. I'm like, I thought that I'd get hey, that was pretty cool and good trades. I'm like, and then I sat back. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, the stories are fun, but I guess kind of the collective wisdom is like, that's just way too out there. Like if you find yourself looking for ideas and it requires that level of sort of out there-ness, it's not to say anything going on in Mongolia is out there, but like, that's like out there. That's like a couple of degrees away from where I had no business being there. I had no expertise in the resource side, still don't, or, in foreign markets like that, but it was right there. So I took it. But I guess the lesson for others is like, if you find yourself stretching that far, reaching that far, maybe just take a second and wonder if that's where you should go.
When did you realize that, looking back? Was it how much profit you made, or like when did you realize that it wasn't worth the investment you made into it, the time investment?
I think it was when we got on the bus to go out that night.
Yeah.
Like there have been nights where you go out in places and you're like, this is a bad idea, but
when you're counting the clicks away from your hotel.
Yeah. Like it wasn't like a afraid for my life. There was no like pressing threat, or immediate threat. But yeah, when you're like, should I just, like if you feel like there's parts of things that you shouldn't participate in because of just general safety like that, or even if you don't feel comfortable like that, that's not to say you shouldn't experience new things. That's not it at all. But just sort of a general level of like, this probably isn't. And I've had friends that have had similar circumstances, like in other countries where, Indonesia, for instance, where they felt very uncomfortable. And after the fact, people are like, oh yeah, I share that feeling as well. And that's why, when I travel, I do this, or when I travel, I don't do that, or if I have similar communication, but I'm staying in and I need to work or something like that.
So do you see a situation like this, doing primary research, that would be worth it for an investment, or do you feel like it's just not worth it in general to go to these lengths?
I mean, if you want to go to lengths, it's good like that, but I don't think you want to put yourself in a place where, looking back, like the amount we could trade wasn't that big. It was one bond, right? So it wasn't like a bunch of different things you could get from it. So there wasn't all this like tangential information or extra information you get that's applicable elsewhere. We weren't going to buy the 3G phone company or the local bank, but that wasn't on the menu. So like, had there been more to it? Yeah. But I think just got one thing and to go that far and like to do one trade, like it just wasn't going to be like a lights out sort of thing either. So it never potential to be something like that.
Why'd you do it in the first place?
It was there. That sounds stupid. It was like, it seemed so preposterous. I'm like, this isn't real, And then they're playing like, oh, yeah, it is.
Well, shiny ball syndrome. We all get that in trading, where you see that setup forming, whether it's fundamental or technical, and you want to verify it, minimize your risk, and then take the trade.
I think there was another gentleman that we crossed over with quite a bit, and he was like, yeah, I think I'm going to go. I'm like, we're kind of like, all right, I'll go if you go. And then I got on the plane, and because I'm like looking around, I'm like, oh.
So John, you mentioned too, like you weren't necessarily like deep into the resource side. So like how, do you think that factors into the, like, is the effort worth it, based on your familiarity with like, the field or your depth in the field?
Yeah, for sure. Because they could have been telling me anything about the coal, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds just amazing. It's just like writing notes down. You're like, when the guy's like looking at the other guy, I'm like, he's buying it. And you're like, yeah, I'm buying it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, because I know Max like talks a little bit about like in trading, just from a really high level kind of, like having a handful of companies that you have some level of familiarity with, or you start to, I'm going to conduct my research here, and I know this, and and then the trades kind of come from that.
Yeah, I call it your family of companies or your family of stocks. It's the 5 or 6 companies that you are very familiar with, that no matter what they're doing, you can make a trade off of it for the most part.
I like it.
And so I guess for John, resources is not that. Yeah.
Yes, this was not in the family for sure.
Yeah, but you got the story out of it. What else did you take away from it besides? I mean, you said you shorted the bond, you bought it. So you took both sides. You traded it like normal, but I'm assuming you probably would have traded it the exact same way if you hadn't gone. You just had a little bit more comfort in picking this.
having that thing about the rail thing, as minute as that sounds, that was like, oh, okay. And then like trying to describe that to people, like try putting that in an investment memo. Like usually it's like, no, there's logistics issues. And you're like, no, like the rail gauge.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Like I'm reading it to someone. I'm like making like hand gestures as if like, oh, got it, thick, thin. You know, like as if like me doing that. And like, oh, got it now. Right? But like writing that in an investment memo, and then people like, you know, at the time the two CIOs or people that kind of made the ultimate decision were U.S. based and London based. So very much.
Okay.
The guy out of London, very smart too, but they had looked into Eastern Europe a little bit. So it wasn't like completely new, but like to tell that story to someone who traded the U.S., they're like, you know, like there's no certain. It's like, oh, so you're telling me the GW Bridge? So you made the lanes too narrow for cars that drive in New York? Why would you do that? And like, well, because they're going to invade us, you know. And it's just like no one would like what? Like,
yeah.
So that was good, but yeah, it was not in the family of companies by any means.
Okay,
That's amazing.
Well, it was fun for you. You, I'm assuming, came away in profit at least, which is important. But it's weird that I guess the different sized gauge rails make sense that they wouldn't understand that. Fine, but you just simply saying, "Hey, this is a logistics issue. Let's realize this logistics issue is in there. Let's buy in because there's enough fundamentals behind this investment or this trade, and then monitor every 3 to 6 months how this logistics issue is being resolved. If there's progress towards resolution, then we stay long. If there's not, then we get out of the trade." But it seems like it wasn't exactly like that. It was more you bought in and the company had other issues that came up and then other issues that came up, and it turned into a mess, not just one logistics issue.
Yeah, we ended up buying it. It was the yield maturity was nice, and I thought the asset coverage was there, and you can model out what the cash flows would look like. So it looked good on a prospective basis. And then traded up, kind of hit where I thought it would be, and it was no longer interesting. Moved out of it, and then they kind of got too rich. And then the financials came out that it looked like, you know, coal prices had moved in such a way. So going the other way with it, that is the nuance as well. So this was, if you want to talk about, again, why this shouldn't be on your list of companies, Mongolian issuer, Hong Kong listed, US dollar. So like if you want to talk about like if it did go through a restructuring finally, but like that was one of the risk factors. Like if this thing ever decided that they wanted to do restructured, like whatever they give you, that's cool. Like there's just like try going through that daisy chain of corporate structure.
So it's just too complicated.
Yeah, and just from a timing, like you're going here, then you're going there, and then you're hiring. I mean, the number of people you have to hire along the way, and like, I'm not going to walk into 𝗬𝗎𝗃 with my, here's my lawyer and my paperwork. Like I'm going to get 100 times better.
Yeah. Colin, you have any similar crazy experiences in Mongolia? I personally don't.
I've never been to Mongolia.
Neither have I.
Spent some time in Africa and like Libya and a few other places like
for
that.
Finance gigs.
Yeah, so we were actually working on a little bit. We were working on the denuclearization of Libya, and then shifting like creating civilian uses for some of those materials like desalinization and cancer treatment and things. And it's a country that in like the late 90s, the life expectancy in Libya was like in the 58 years old. And by 2007 or something like that, it was up into like the mid 60s. Low 70s. So now people are living longer. You had a population of however many million people, and they had like 2 oncologists in the whole country. So they're talking about like, oh yeah, like we'll finance this cancer treatment facility in Benghazi. But then like these issues are like, oh, what's the gauge of the railroad, right? It's like, well, we can't stop. Like we have to change the whole curriculum of their medical school program and put it on a fast track and like hire in doctors from Egypt for 3 years before, so it's fascinating the different things that go together or don't go together. And it's been interesting to see, like, even in the last couple of years, I've made a lot of investments in the legal cannabis industry, and it's taken me to some interesting places. There's one that we actually did do that. It's in an abandoned shopping mall in like on the border between Virginia, West Virginia, and Tennessee, in like this little triangle of land.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like in an old 𝗕𝗓 like location, multi-level 𝗕𝗓, and they're growing like cannabis. First legal cannabis since George Washington in the state of Virginia, is now in the 𝗕𝗓 former, space.
Nice. Right where it belongs.
Because it's normal. It's probably the most people that have ever been in that 𝗕𝗓. But that's, it's an interesting, it's like from John's blog post last week where, like that shopping mall is a perfect example of an asset that turned into a liability.
Yeah.
And it's
Colin's
sad.
talking about the flip when assets turn into liabilities. The situation John wrote about, that company's assets can very quickly turn into liabilities when there's lots of issues going on, such as what you're talking about.
Right. And we see a lot of that. And, like sometimes I'll see it, and I had a conversation with a guy the other day that owned property and wanted to open a business in this property. And I said, look, like the way it's set up and the way it's licensed and the regulatory environment, like even if you gave me free rent for 2 years, like it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Like it is a true liability.
Yeah.
And this mall had sat vacant for 5 or 6 years.
Amazing.
Like entirely vacant. And when we went in there, like they hadn't even thought about, stripping some of the stuff out. I was like, there's like, it wasn't worth it to even like scrap the copper or, any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're also not going to use it. They're not going to put more shops in there, And,
wow.
Yeah, so it's fascinating.
If those listening want to hear more about that and the topic of the flip and Colin's examples more on the cannabis and legal cannabis industry and how, because I'm sure that's an industry where you see that more than any, because you're investing in so many assets up front, but there's infinite risk behind it with legalization and all of that. Then just let us know. You know how to get a hold of us. And other than that, I think the biggest takeaway from John's story and from what you're saying, Colin, is there's so much going on behind the scenes with these companies. Most of the people listening to this, I'm assuming, are just sitting behind their computers at home trading or investing if they're involved in the stock market in any way. And you can see the number on the screen, but if you don't look into the numbers and the paperwork of a company, and then the next level of flying out to Mongolia and going through this whole, like there's layers and layers and layers to all of the fundamentals and technicals behind a company that you just can never truly know everything that's going on. Even most CEOs don't know what's going on in their entire company. So when you take an investment, just be aware of that, I suppose. You can't factor in for all risks, so make sure you are not risking too much and that your reward is good. And in John's case, your reward seems worth it with stories and a few profits.
Yeah,
I think so.
Some cashmere.
Yeah. And 1.2 million of cashmere, right?
Yes.
Just different currency. That's fun. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Thank you for listening. Anybody who's listening, we're going to do this every single week on discussing the blog of the week or discussing different topics, different stories we've all experienced in the investing, finance, trading space. So keep listening. Stay tuned. Follow us on all the social media, our website, inlighttrading.com, and you'll see every blog post and podcast we publish.